The corridors of the French court breathed whispers long before dawn. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Louvre, servants moved like shadows, their steps muted by the chill of secrets. Catherine de' Medici stood at the window of her private chamber, eyes fixed on the gray river curling through the heart of Paris. The fog thickened over the water, the same way suspicion thickened over her reign. She had come from Florence decades earlier, as a pawn in alliances, a Medici bride sold to the son of France. She had arrived with jewels that caught the candlelight, and a mind far sharper than anyone dared to imagine. They called her the Italian witch, the poisoner, the queen who smiled while men died. But beneath the rumors lay a truth more intricate than poison itself. She had learned early that in a court ruled by vanity and ambition, mercy was a form of suicide. When Henry, her husband, ascended the throne, Catherine became queen of a nation divided. France bled from religious wars between Catholics and Protestants. Nobles turned faith into a weapon, and loyalty to the crown meant little beside loyalty to power. Henry loved another, Diane de Poitiers, his mistress, and the mirror of his desires. Catherine learned silence then. She observed, memorized, calculated. For years she lived as an ornament, the barren queen whom courtiers ignored. But she watched everything, every alliance, every betrayal, every whisper of treason that floated between the velvet drapes of the royal chambers. When Henry died from a splintered lance that pierced his eye in a tournament, the court gasped, but Catherine did not. The tournament had been arranged for celebration, yet destiny had slipped its knife through the armor. Standing beside his deathbed, she saw the power shift like a tide. Diane was cast out within hours. Catherine sealed the treasury, locked the gates, and took control of the royal children. Her blood, her weapons, her hostages against France itself. Her eldest son, Francis II, ascended the throne, but he was fragile and foolish, bound to his young wife, Mary Stuart, the Scottish queen raised to charm but not to rule. Around them, the Guise family, ambitious uncles of Mary, tightened their grip on power. They whispered to the boy king, turning him against his mother. Catherine smiled through their triumph, hosting banquets while her spies mapped every hidden corridor of betrayal. When Francis fell ill, the Guises ordered the guards to keep her away. Yet she moved like smoke, entering his chamber under the pretense of prayer. She watched his breath falter. When he died, France trembled again. Now her second son, Charles IX, became king. He was 10, pale, impressionable. Catherine was no longer queen consort, she was queen mother, and through him, regent of France. The courtiers called her Madame Serpent. She did not deny it. The serpent survives where lions and lambs perish. Catherine understood that France would devour itself if left to faith and pride. She tried to hold the balance between the Catholic League and the Huguenots. She met with nobles who hated one another, promising peace with one hand while readying soldiers with the other. Every signature she made, every marriage she arranged, every feast she planned carried the scent of calculation. Among her children, the seeds of betrayal had already taken root. Charles loved her, yet feared her. Henry, the Duke of Anjou, longed for independence and despised her control. Marguerite, her daughter, born beautiful and reckless, became both pawn and weapon. Catherine believed she could hold them all in her grasp, but power slips even from the strongest hands when soaked in blood. The year was 1572. Catherine, desperate to unite the fractured kingdom, arranged a marriage between her daughter Marguerite and Henry of Navarre, the Protestant prince. The wedding would symbolize peace between Catholics and Huguenots. Paris filled with nobles from both sides, a fragile celebration balanced upon a blade. Beneath the music, hatred simmered. Catherine felt it in the air, metallic and sharp. 3 days after the wedding, an assassination attempt struck Admiral Coligny, a Huguenot leader dear to the new king of Navarre. The bullet missed his heart. The Protestants blamed the Catholics. Paris braced for war. Catherine visited the wounded admiral, speaking gentle words. He believed her sympathy. He did not see the silent exchange between her and the Duke of Guise as they left the chamber. Night descended on the 23rd of August. The bells of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois rang before dawn. What followed would stain France forever. Soldiers moved through the streets with torches and knives, windows opened to screams, blood pooled in the gutters mixed with wine and rain. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre had begun. From her balcony, Catherine watched the fires consume the city. They said she laughed. She did not. She simply stood, unmoving, as thousands died in the name of a peace that never came. Coligny was thrown from a window, his corpse mutilated. The Seine carried bodies past the palace. Henry of Navarre was spared, forced to convert to Catholicism to save his life. Marguerite trembled, her wedding dress soaked in another man's blood. The massacre shattered any illusion of harmony. Catherine's enemies multiplied. To the Protestants she was a monster, to the Catholics a manipulator who betrayed her own faith. To her sons she was both mother and puppet master. Charles IX began to lose himself. He wandered the halls at night, haunted by ghosts only he could see. He whispered that the blood would not wash from his hands. Catherine soothed him with tonics brewed by her Italian alchemists, mixtures of herbs and dreams. But the nightmares grew. He coughed blood, his youth eaten away by guilt. On his deathbed, he reached for his mother and begged for forgiveness. Catherine told him to rest. He died whispering her name. Her third son, Henry of Anjou, now crowned Henry III, returned from Poland to take the throne. He was brilliant, vain, unpredictable. He wore pearls and prayed with equal devotion. He distrusted his mother's influence, yet depended on her cunning. Catherine, aging but undiminished, understood that her son saw her as both shield and shadow. She had built them crowns from the bones of her enemies. Now they sought to cast her aside. The court turned into a theater of treachery. The Catholic League, led by the Guise family, demanded the eradication of Protestants once and for all. Henry III hesitated, torn between reason and fanaticism. Catherine urged moderation, but no one listened. Power had become a ghost that consumed those who chased it. Whispers rose that Catherine had lost her touch, that her poisons no longer worked, her spells faded. She smiled. People feared witches because witches survived. One winter evening, as snow fell over Blois, she summoned her children for a council. The candlelight revealed faces marked by exhaustion and ambition. Henry paced. Marguerite glared from the corner. The Queen Mother spoke of unity, of the need to end the war before France collapsed entirely. But unity was a word none of them understood anymore. Betrayal had become the language of the bloodline. As she looked at them, the king, the disgraced daughter, the fading courtiers, Catherine saw the ruin she had built. Each of them had learned deceit from her. Each had inherited her instinct to survive by any means. Power had devoured love, and the crown had devoured France. Yet she could not stop. To step back was to die. The following months drew her deeper into conspiracies she no longer fully controlled. The Duke of Guise, bold and adored by the people, threatened the king's authority. The streets of Paris echoed with chants of rebellion. Catherine counseled caution, but Henry's jealousy grew into rage. He invited Guise to the royal chamber at Blois. There, under the tapestries of saints, the king's guards struck him down. Blood darkened the marble. Henry stood over the corpse, shaking. Catherine entered moments later, eyes unreadable. She said nothing, only looked at her son as if measuring how far he had fallen. He asked her if he had done right. She told him that right and wrong were luxuries for those who did not wear crowns. By the next spring, the League revolted. The people called for vengeance. Henry fled Paris, hunted by his own subjects. Catherine followed him to the city of Chenonceau, the castle she had loved most. There, surrounded by water and silence, she walked the halls lined with memories. Portraits of her children watched from the walls, their painted eyes frozen in time. She thought of Florence, of her youth, of a life that had belonged to another woman. She wondered whether power had ever truly been hers, or only borrowed from the chaos she mastered. When the plague returned to France, the court scattered. Catherine fell ill. Fever blurred her thoughts. She dreamed of blood on cobblestones, of laughter echoing through burning streets. She saw her sons as children again, running through the gardens before ambition consumed them. She whispered to the empty room that she had done everything for them. Perhaps that was the greatest betrayal of all. The fever came in waves that blurred the line between dream and memory. Catherine lay in her chamber at Blois, the curtains drawn tight against the winter air. Outside, the Loire River flowed in silence, carrying frost and fog downstream. The physicians burned herbs, recited prayers, and bled her as tradition demanded, but her thoughts wandered far from the murmurs of medicine. She remembered Florence, the narrow streets, the scent of ink and spices, the Medici palace rising above all others. She had been born into a dynasty that believed power was art, deceit was strategy, and mercy was weakness. She had carried those lessons across the Alps to a land that would never forgive her for learning them too well. Her son, Henry III, sat by her bed, pale and distracted. His once golden curls had dulled, his eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. France had turned against him. The League controlled Paris. The Protestants waited like wolves in the south. Catherine's heart no longer feared death, only the collapse of the kingdom she had sacrificed everything to hold together. "You must make peace," she whispered. Her voice was thin, almost invisible. "If you cannot rule by faith, rule by fear, but never by hesitation." Henry nodded but said nothing. He still loved her, though it was the kind of love that grew from dependence and resentment intertwined. For days she drifted between lucidity and delirium. At times she thought she saw Charles, standing at the foot of her bed, blood on his hands, his eyes hollow. Other times she saw her husband Henry II, his face fractured by the lance that had killed him, yet smiling as if mocking her endurance. She murmured apologies to no one and confessions to the walls. Servants avoided her gaze, whispering that the witch queen was bargaining with demons. Perhaps she was. When she finally awoke with clarity, she knew her time was ending. She summoned her confessor and her secretaries, dictated letters to the nobles still loyal to the crown, and instructed her attendants to bring the jewels of the Valois dynasty. As they laid the caskets before her, she touched each piece, the rubies from Florence, the sapphires of Lorraine, the pearls that once belonged to Diane de Poitiers. They were tokens of victories long past, relics of a dynasty built upon betrayal. She ordered them sealed and sent to her son. "He will need symbols," she said quietly. "Even when power fades, symbols command obedience." By the time the first thaw reached the Loire, Catherine de' Medici was dead. She had ruled France longer than any woman before her, yet few mourned her passing. Her body lay in state at Blois for weeks, unburied, while her son struggled to hold the crown. The rumors began at once, that her spirit haunted the corridors, that her death marked the end of the Valois line, that France itself was cursed for her sins. Henry III rode through the countryside, carrying the guilt of her memory like a shadow. Without her counsel, he found himself surrounded by traitors disguised as allies. The Duke of Mayenne, brother of the murdered Guise, raised an army in her name of vengeance. The League declared that the king had lost God's favor. Paris turned wholly against him. Henry fled to seek aid from an unlikely ally, Henry of Navarre, the very Protestant prince Catherine had once tried to destroy. Two kings, both named Henry, stood facing each other in a ruined monastery near Tours. The air between them was heavy with history. Henry III spoke first. "My mother believed peace could be forged from blood," he said. "She was wrong. But perhaps her death gives us one last chance." Henry of Navarre, cautious and sharp-eyed, studied him. "She killed my people," he answered, "but I understand her language. She did it for survival." The two men clasped hands. An alliance was born from the ashes of Catherine's empire. Together they marched toward Paris. But fate, which had long favored no one in France, intervened again. One morning, as the royal army prepared to advance, a young Dominican friar was admitted to the king's presence, claiming to bear secret letters. As Henry III bent to read, the friar drew a dagger and plunged it into his chest. The king staggered, gasping. His guards killed the assassin instantly, but it was too late. Henry fell, whispering something only he could hear. Witnesses said he called for his mother. Others said he murmured that the crown had devoured its own blood. With his death, the Valois line ended. Catherine's dynasty vanished into history, replaced by the Bourbon House of Navarre. The same Protestant prince she had once tried to bend now became King Henry IV of France. Her enemies claimed this was divine justice, the serpent slain by its own poison. Yet even the new king could not escape her shadow. Years later, Henry IV would tell his ministers that the art of rule was not learned from saints, but from survivors. "France owes much to that Italian woman," he once said. "She taught us that power is not inherited, it is engineered." He reigned with caution, always aware that a whisper in the court could become a blade in the dark. Catherine's ghost lingered in every council chamber, in every decision weighed between mercy and survival. But her story did not die with her bloodline. Chroniclers painted her as a monster, poets turned her into legend. They wrote that she had studied astrology and witchcraft, that her mirror spoke prophecies, that she kept poison hidden in her rings. Some swore she bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth. The truth was far less supernatural and far more human. She understood that power demanded a price most were unwilling to pay. Those who called her heartless never understood that it had been broken long before she ever wore a crown. She had loved her children, though her love had turned into control, then fear, then necessity. In the end, she betrayed them only because she could not protect them without doing so. Royal blood, she learned, is both inheritance and curse. In Florence, the Medici chroniclers refused to condemn her. They called her the last great Florentine, the daughter of bankers who rose to rule kings. But in France, she became a cautionary tale. Every queen who followed her, Marie de Medici, Anne of Austria, faced her ghost as a warning. Never love your throne too much, for it will never love you in return. Decades after her death, a scholar found her letters hidden within the archives of the Louvre. They were not confessions of guilt or spells of darkness, but meticulous instructions on governance, alliances, and human nature. "Men," she had written, "are loyal only to the advantage they can see. A ruler's task is to make them believe that advantage lies in obedience." Another letter read, "My sons thought I ruled through fear. They were mistaken. I ruled through memory. A man forgets pain, but he never forgets humiliation." Those words resurfaced during the reigns that followed, quoted by statesmen and despised by priests. Catherine's philosophy became the unspoken code of power in Europe, manipulation disguised as order, control justified by chaos. She had not destroyed France, she had merely held it together long enough for others to rebuild it upon the corpses she left behind. And yet, behind all the calculation, a fragment of her humanity survived. In her private diary, one that no chronicler read until centuries later, she had written a single line that revealed the woman beneath the crown. "If love were enough, I would have been merciful, but love is never enough for those born to rule." Time dulled her legend, but never erased it. Even as revolutions swept through France 2 centuries later, when mobs tore down royal banners and burned palaces, whispers of Catherine returned. The revolutionaries spoke of tyranny, but the scholars knew her name symbolized something deeper, the eternal cycle of power devouring its own makers. In the halls of Chenonceau, her favorite residence, the marble floors still bore faint marks where she had walked, pacing in the silence between wars. The castle, shaped like a bridge over the river, seemed suspended between two worlds, just as she had lived between loyalty and treachery, faith and sin, life and shadow. Visitors claimed they could feel her presence near the gallery windows at dusk, a chill that whispered strategy into their bones. History, however, is merciless to queens. It loves their beauty, records their crimes, and forgets their reasons. Catherine de' Medici's legacy became the story of the mother who betrayed her children, the queen who turned weddings into massacres, the woman who believed in survival more than salvation. But within that legend lies the essence of every royal betrayal, that power, once grasped, cannot be held without cutting those closest to you. The chroniclers closed their books with her death, but her story continued in the hearts of those who ruled after. Kings who poisoned their brothers, queens who sent lovers to the scaffold, ministers who murdered in the name of stability, all were her descendants in spirit. They followed the map she had drawn, a world where betrayal was not sin but survival strategy. In the quiet centuries that followed, her tomb in Saint-Denis was often neglected. Pilgrims came to pray for forgiveness, though none knew what forgiveness meant to her. Perhaps she never sought it. Perhaps she believed, as she once told her confessor, that God forgives those who rule, because ruling is punishment enough. So the queen who betrayed her bloodline sleeps beneath stone, her name carved beside the kings she made and unmade. The river still flows past her castles, and the wind still carries her legend through the gardens she once designed to hide secret meetings. To those who listen, her ghost speaks not of remorse, but of warning, that the crown, in every age, demands its price in loyalty paid with blood. And in that warning lies the truth she never denied, that every dynasty is born of betrayal, and every throne rests upon the bones of the ones who loved it too much.